Coming up in a moment, we will be joined by Jess Hill. She is, quite frankly, incredible. She has written a very important book that you may be familiar with. She's also now the host of a 10-part series called The Trap. It's been put out by the Victorian Women's Trust. It's a 10-part series about love, abuse and power. It is so powerful. It is so important. Yourself, someone that you love, this is important listening for all of us, in fact. And so we'll have a chat with her about that in a moment.
You're with Jacinta Parsons on ABC Radio Melbourne.
I reckon this podcast is so important. It may be something that will be an important listen for you or maybe someone that you love. But I think for all of us, it's an important podcast for us to find some time to listen and to have some exposure to the stories that are brought forth. It has been put out by the Victorian Women's Trust. It's a 10-part series called The Trap. The host of this podcast is Australian investigative journalist and award-winning author of See What You Made Me Do, Jess Hill. Jess, good afternoon.
G'day, Jacinta. How are you?
Look, I'm really good. I'm just so grateful for your work on See What You Made Me Do. But now that this work is extended not only to a 3-part SBS TV show, or series I should say, but now to a really important 10-part audio documentary. Tell us roughly what you had set out to do with this podcast.
Yeah, well, actually we started working on this podcast before the SBS series was like even a twinkle in my eye. So it was something that the Victoria Women's Trust actually approached me to do once they saw the book. And essentially they wanted to create like this definitive series about domestic abuse and particularly men's violence against women in Australia. And it's interesting, when we started this 18 months ago and the conversation in Australia has developed rapidly during that time. So, when we first met, it was before the murder of Hannah Clark and her 3 children. That dramatically changed the conversation on domestic abuse towards focusing on coercive control and what is coercive control and how is it that even men who don't use physical violence but use controlling behaviours can be even more dangerous. And how is it that someone could go from not using physical violence at all to murdering their entire family? So I think Australia's been grappling with that. And so as we went along, we sort of, our premise really evolved. And I think the reason when we called it The Trap is that for a long time, we've really thought about domestic violence and family violence as a series of incidents or even just a collection of abuses. It's psychological, emotional, financial, spiritual abuse. What we're trying to do is redefine that and show that actually what you're looking at is a type of trap that starts in personal space, indoors and behind closed doors, as the saying goes, but it extends well out into public space after the relationship is finished and it's perpetuated by so many of our systems. And really the trap applies to the trap that is actually coercive control, the trap that children are in, but also the trap that society is in and the trap of patriarchal masculinity, the trap of expectations. So we're really trying to prosecute this whole argument of like, what is the trap? How do people get into it? How do our systems perpetuate it? And how do we get out of it?
It's a question that we have been asking for a long time as a society, and thanks to work like you have done, we're starting to get a much more nuanced understanding of, that cat's cry, why doesn't she just leave him? You bring up a really wonderful term in the first episode of The Trap called perspective side. Is that what it is?
Yeah, it's amazing.
And can you explain it for us? Because I think even in that alone, if we can get people listening to this series, it will help with that.
So perspecticide is a term that was popularised by an American psychologist, Lisa Aronson Fontes, who wrote a great book, Invisible Chains.
And who joins you on the series as well.
She does, yeah. So perspecticide is essentially the process by which the victim survivor's thoughts, feelings, and perspectives get overwhelmed. It's almost like they are evacuated and replaced with the thoughts, feelings, and very strong needs of the perpetrator. Such that, so many women particularly, but anyone who's been subjected to coercive control, women and men, will say that they wake up in the morning or they look in the mirror and the first voice that comes into their head is no longer their own. It's their partner's. It's their partners judging them for what they look like, or they're wondering, what kind of mood are they going to be in today? What do I need to do to strategize around that to keep them on an even keel? But everything is oriented towards the perpetrator. And essentially, I think what we haven't really grasped about domestic abuse and what we're really trying to get across in this podcast is that coercive control is a type of thought reform process, and it changes the minds of the people who are being controlled. And it's like they forget who they are.
And just the way that you illustrate that in this series, you're up to your third episode in this series, is so wonderful because everybody can put themselves in the shoes of how this happens. It happens in small ways. There's a big reaction to something that you do, and so you think, oh, God, I don't want to have to go through that again, so I'll stop doing that thing. It's those little micro changes that you make to accommodate for big things, a big energy in your life potentially. It's not this, thing that happens to the other in a lot of ways.
And I think that a lot of what happens in, really, there's a lot of grey area in relationships, which you wouldn't say are abusive necessarily or relationships of coercive control, but where some of these elements are present, where, it just settles, a narrative settles in the relationship that, look, I have some bad behaviours, but I wouldn't be like that if you weren't like the way you are, So the partner who's starting to believe that really at the heart of the relationship problems, it's their fault because of something that they're deficient in, not enough love, not enough intimacy, not enough this, too many male friends, whatever it is, that they start to focus inwards. And so it kind of gives their partner, whether they be an abusive partner or just a regular partner, kind of free rein to act in ways that are really inexcusable, because at the heart of it, it's like, well, if you would just fix yourself, all of this would end. And that's really, at the core of a lot of coercive control is the refocusing of the perspective inside, and then over time overwhelming that perspective so that every time you're thinking about what to do next, you're really thinking, how do I not inflame this person? Yeah. How do I keep things on an even keel? And your brain, you are living kind of minute to minute, day to day. The idea that you would then, in that space, have the perspective enough to go, right, I'm going to think about my life. I've got maybe my kids here, or I'm thinking I'm going to leave this person. I'm going to risk assess. That is such a massive step out of what is becoming a very, very small world that you're living in your head.
It is phenomenal too. You go out into the field as well, and you're with women that have just left, and it is heartbreaking to hear that they are kind of touching into another reality momentarily when they're told, actually, what was happening to you was not okay. And they have to really reach back and go, oh, okay, maybe it wasn't. Because as you say, their touch in with what they have thought previously doesn't exist in those moments.
That's right. And I think suddenly, when women talk about, particularly when they leave and they've maybe been out for a week or something, and suddenly their perspective starts coming back and they start to see, oh my God, what have I been living in? And it's like peeling an onion. They'll see that top layer and just be like, oh my God, I can't believe what I've been enduring. But then layer after layer you have to peel off, and you have to interrogate your own choices, what you went along with, why did you do that? And I think that, society asks women, why didn't they just leave? Women ask themselves that. They punish themselves for not leaving. They punish themselves for not protecting their children enough, even when, in reality, they were strategizing in an impossible situation. And some women will be so overwhelmed that actually they may not have protected their children well enough. But what I think is really useful for anyone who's experienced coercive control is to say that if you were disoriented, if you were confused, if you did things that you don't recognise and that you feel ashamed of, that's not a deficiency on your part. They are the symptoms of being coercively controlled.
And there is help for you. I think that is such an important thing. Hearing one of the voices in the series say, someone said to me, "Are you okay?" And at the time I said, "Yes, I am." "Yep, fine." But it at least it planted a tiny seed inside me to wonder that maybe I could get out of the situation that I was in.
But there's even room to question, because that's the thing is, and this is why isolation is often so key to coercive control, is that when you don't have other people coming in and asking those questions, you really just get so used to the new normal. And so when someone, especially it can be just a stranger, like a nurse or a midwife, if it wasn't that situation, can just come in and go, "I've just noticed behaviour for the last 2 minutes that makes me, concerned for your safety." Suddenly it's like the outside, it's like this little bit of light, streaming in through a crack in the window. And you're like, "Oh my God, this might not be what I think it is." But because you're in such a tight situation in this coercive control, and there's so many impossible things to be dealing with, being able to respond in that moment straight away and going, "You know what, you're right, I am in danger and I need to leave right now," that's often not possible. But as you say, it sets in train, and the process of leaving or the process of getting safety, whichever way you do, is a game of snakes and ladders, and you have to start somewhere, and that's why bystander intervention is so critical.
This text coming in from a very tired sergeant in Melbourne. "I'm heading off to work while I will order probably 3 to 5 men out of their homes. I'll probably argue with 2 of them on average. I'll get told I'm being lied to. I probably am at least once. I'll go back to the office and strike out 5 to 8 FV criminal briefs for lack of evidence or because the other part has withdrawn the complaint. I'm not giving up, but logic tells me I should, because we're not even making a drop in the ocean of family violence. I may save 1 to 5 women and men, believe it or not, this goes both ways, particularly coercive control, and the others I will not save. They will get hurt, sometimes badly, because I don't have a magic wand and the world sucks. I really love the SBS series, but talking about this is not enough." And again, that's from a very tired sergeant in Melbourne. Jess?
Oh, yeah, no, I totally hear that. And particularly under lockdown, there's so much exhaustion from service providers, and the amount of violence and oppression they're seeing is really going through the roof. What I would say to that exhausted sergeant is it's not just on you, and I know it can feel like it is because you're arriving at these moments of high crisis.
Yeah, the very front line of it.
Yeah, and what I hear so often from people, from victims, is that the interaction they have with police, when they feel like if police come through the door and they treat them with respect, they are interested in not just what's happened in the past half hour, but the pattern of behaviour that's led up to the call out. If they take them seriously, even if they withdraw their complaint, even if they, if they make life difficult for police by not showing up at court, the fact is that little bit of trust has just started to be planted. And you've got to remember, these people are needing to trust a system that is inherently untrustworthy and unreliable, that there are good people in that system, but you don't know if you're going to get a good person or a bad person. So the victim survivor has to be very, very careful. They're confused and they're disoriented.
Yes.
But they need police, and they need all people working in this to slowly prove themselves.
1-800-RESPECT is the phone number, 1-800-RESPECT.org.au. This for you, Jess. It was only after reading Jess's book I did finally understand what my husband was doing. And do you know how devastating it was to finally realise that? 14 months later, after ending my marriage, I'm a former shell of myself, but I am upright, I am alive, and so are my 2 children. And he didn't even lay a hand on me. It was all psychological, coercive control. That's from a wonderful listener. Jess, thank you so much. Please, Victorian Women's Trust is where you need to go. The podcast, the series is called The Trap. It is so important for all of us to get our ears across this. And if this is a way that you can share this with someone that you might be thinking about, please do so. Jess Hill, thank you for your work.